You wanna play Rubick, I wanna play Rubick, everyone wants to play Rubick right now. But to get the most out of any hero in Dota, you most likely wanna spend some time doing, basic research. Looking at replays, analyzing item builds, positioning, what spells to steal, etc. It's a lot of work. Let me do it for you instead. I looked through the top 10 games with the highest Rubick impact, and this is how the Immortals play Position 4 Rubick. Also, it's patch 7.32c if anyone is watching this in the future. I feel like Valve doesn't really touch Rubick that much, so you should be fine. Okay, so there are 3 different starting item builds you can go for. The standard build is Sentry and Obby, Magic Stick and a Fairy Fire. You fill the remaining slots and use your remaining gold on tangos, branches and mangoes. Most commonly you go 3 tangos, 2 branches and 1 mango. You can also go for a salve, which some Rubicks do, but it's not common enough to be a standard build. There is also a variation on the starting build where you swap out the stick for null talisman components. And finally, rarely you can go for boots and tango. So, when do you want to go for the different starting builds? Well, if you're not sure, as the name implies, just go for the standard no null build. It is what 70% of top players go for, it's completely fine. The null build doesn't seem to rely on draft or lanes, but more on personal preference. The people who like null go null every game, and the people who don't like going null never go null. So my advice is just to try it out. Does the null feel good for you or bad for you? It's in the end up to you. If you want to analyze some games where the Rubick goes for a null, I'd recommend checking out Bok and Boxy, who both seem to be enjoying starting with the null components. When it comes to starting with boots, there is the obvious argument if you feel like you can't trade with the enemy, just go boots and focus on pulling, blocking, stacking, the standard position 4 shit. But in reality, it honestly seems like going boots is a personal preference as well, since the ones who go boots as starting items almost every single game they play, and those who don't like boots never go boots in the starting items. So, once again, my advice is just to pick a build and see how the pros play them in lane, and then just stick with a single build. I'm personally going to talk about the standard build in this video, since it's by far the most popular one, and the one that I'm personally going to play with. This right here is Miposhka. You might have heard of him, he won a tournament a while ago, playing the standard item build. With the only variation being that he did not go for a wand, but he gets it within the first minute or so I'm still going to call it the standard item build. Now, almost every single Rubick places a ward in this small camp right here. Pretty standard support behavior. Whether you want to do it before or after the runes seems to highly depend on whether you want to place an observer as well or not. If you have an obby to place, you want to do it before the bounties to minimize the risk of the enemy seeing you placing it. In the lane, the behavior follows the standard ranged soft support model, but one thing that shocked me a lot is how much Miposhka and pretty much all the other Rubicks prioritized right-clicking the enemy. It's not that strange considering, you are going to go a lot of stats, so your right click is actually gonna pack a little punch, not that much, but it's still decent for a ranged boss 4. Now, let's talk about skill build. You should go fade, lift, fade, arcane, fade, steal, fade. I mean, it's super rare to see a hero with this much consistency between players, but almost everyone always goes for this build. For level 8, 9 and 10, you are finally allowed to make a decision. I know it's insane. The most standard option is just to max out arcane, but it's not too uncommon for pros to mix in a level or 2 of lift in their skill build. The conditions where the Immortal's skill lift seem to be ones where they're able to combo well with the extra stun duration, like Witch Doctor's ult or CM ult. Now, if you're anything like me, you might be wondering, wait, how about the talents? You said we were gonna level arcane at level 10. Don't you just go for the talents at level 10 like with every other hero in the game? No, they are complete garbage. Instead, what you do is you level up your remaining abilities to max, get your level 15 talent, and then at level 16 you get your level 10 talent. Speaking of, let's talk about the talent. For the level 10 talent, which you get at level 16, not confusing at all, you can choose between making your Fade Bolt damage debuff a tiny bit stronger or increasing your telekinesis landing damage. Again, neither option is super good. This option doesn't really seem to have a huge impact on the game, so if you want to be creative, this is the place to do that. The pros generally go for the right option, but there are some that go for the left option, and I mean, it seems to vary more around the players themselves compared to the games and the drafts. Does this choice matter? Not enough to warrant talking about it for more than 18 seconds. The level 15 talent is on the contrary very impactful. You have the choice between making your base kit stun stronger or reducing the stolen spells cooldown. 90% of the time, the pros go for the cooldown reduction talent. From my little legend perspective, I have to say this talent feels really good with certain spells. Sure, having a lower cooldown on big ultimates is nice, but the real strength, in my opinion, comes from the uptime on smaller spells. I know it's not very flashy, but having a 25% cooldown reduction on that mine you stole from Tekis or that stun from Night Stalker does make a huge difference in fights. Still, there are still games where the Immortals go for the extra lift duration. Why? Well, the only common denominator I could find between the games where Rubick went for the extra lift duration was an enemy Leshrac. But to be honest, I don't really understand why, since the extra lift duration is not needed at all and just serves to complicate the stun timing. If you have any theories, here are the complete drafts of the anomalous games, but for now I'm personally just going to go for the right option every single time at level 15. The choice at level 20 between a longer telekinesis or a reduced Fade Bolt stun is very balanced. The Immortals seem to value both options roughly equally, and I couldn't really find any clear conditions that force either option. I did find that the people who had bought a shard for Rubick, the one that allows him to lift his allies, had a much higher rate of picking the extra telekinesis range, since it has a pretty massive effect. If repositioning the enemy or your teammates feels strong, I'll just go for the left talent. Otherwise my default will just be the right one. Finally, you rarely reach level 25 as Rubick, but if you do, most Immortals seem to prefer the left option. I think the right option is fine as well, it's up to you, I don't really know, I never get to level 25 anyways, so... Let's talk about items. The absolutely most standard build is Boots, Wand, Arcane Boots, Aether Lens, Blink. There are genuinely few heroes right now where the builds are so similar between players and games. Sure, a lot of people skip Wand and sometimes they get a Blink before Aether Lens, but generally I think this is one of the easiest heroes to itemize right now, in my opinion. About a quarter of Rubiks seem to like mixing in a shard as well, Aghanim's shard, usually after Blink. After you've gotten your Aether Lens Blink, usually you can either go for a Ghost Scepter, a more defensive option, or a Shard or Aghanim's, which is usually a more offensive option. There are some cases, of course, where a Shard against, for example, a Pudge allows you to still dismember, which is a great defensive option, and is basically broken on Rubick. But usually if the game is hard and you're just completely getting killed every single fight, most Rubiks just go for a Ghost Scepter or even a Glimmer Cape. One thing I've noticed that the Rubiks do, that I'm trying to learn myself or improve at, is buying a lot of regen. You can see in this game, Miposhka, even though he has 2 mangoes, he has half regen, it's not that bad, sends out a clarity as well. It's not that huge of a decision, but it's still pretty impactful, especially as the game goes on, that you always have enough mana for 2 of your spells. Another thing is that just because the standard build is so incredibly robust, That doesn't mean that you can't buy extra small items like raindrops, and of course you're gonna have to buy sentries. And as I said earlier, buying a couple of clarities or even a couple of tangos a bit later on is completely fine. That's gonna help you a lot with keeping up your mana regen, even after you got an arcane boots. At level 6, generally, if you have the ability to, you should of course try to steal big powerful ultimates like Witch Doctors, but of course you're not always gonna have that opportunity. And generally, I feel like most professional Rubicks really try to focus in on short cooldown, stuns or just damage spells, but generally stuns and disables. For example, I don't think many professional Rubicks would steal Mars's arena. It's way better to have a spear or a coconut or even a fisher. I think fisher is one of the most popular spells to steal, just because these short cooldown range dependent spells really get amplified a lot by Rubick's extra range spell lamp, and especially when he gets Eighth Lance, he has such an insane cast range that the enemy is gonna have a tough time playing around it. Of course, if you have stolen a big spell, you shouldn't remove it or waste it by stealing another smaller spell. It's just that most of the time you're not going to be able to steal these big, high damage utility spells. As a proof for what I've been saying in the past few seconds, this Rubick right here, Miposhka, stole an arena in a fight earlier, but even though he has a big ultimate, he's still going to steal something else, just because arena is not really good as Rubick. You know, it doesn't have any cast range, it doesn't really get affected by spell lamp, maybe the soldiers on the edges do, but generally it's better to have a small spell that has some utility compared to a big ultimate that has zero utility. So this was my short little concise Rubick guide. If you have any feedback, let me know. I want to improve my shit, as does everyone, I guess. And maybe try it out in pubs a bit. I think Rubick is honestly one of the strongest position 4 heroes right now. Even though some people disagree, I do still feel like he has a lot of capabilities to carry games. But with that being said, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one, hopefully. Bye bye.